It is so great to be back in Wisconsin. Thank you so much for having me.
He's going to be doing a book signing afterwards too, so hang out if you want.
As I said, it's great to be here in Wisconsin. We're known for very cold winters, but this is it's a bit much, sweltering. If anyone is feeling faint, please tell your neighbor, especially those of you powering us. If this light could be a little brighter, so you in the back, just a little, thank you. I want to thank the organizers of this incredible event, 29 years of this energy fair. My understanding is that it started just from a handful of people with an idea, and it spread kind of word of mouth, and then it was 3,000 people gathering, and then it was 5,000, and it grew to at points where it was over 20,000 people attending. And I'm sure there are people of various political stripes. Maybe there are people here that voted for Hillary Clinton, or people that voted for Donald Trump, or people that voted for Jill Stein, but the common thread that probably unites all of us in this world, in this room, is that we share this planet as our home. It is our responsibility to be stewards of this planet. And it's not just about nuclear power or finding clean alternatives. It's also, how do we as individuals live our lives? How are we going to leave this place that gave us this great gift of our world? And I see it just walking around, so many people who in their own ways, some are taking on big issues, some are taking on local issues, some are taking on the most micro issues of how your family is going to live. All of that is connected by the same thread, which is it's about the survival of our species, the survival of other species, the survival of our planet. So regardless of where you stood in this last presidential election, you're all here for a reason, and it is a starting point for all of us to have a discussion. You have a very contentious governor's race coming up. There's an enormous field of Democrats, right? In fact, you have almost enough Democrats to be the legislature that are ready for governor here. You know, I grew up in Milwaukee, and then my family moved to Wauwatosa after I finished 8th grade, and I've been following very much the news in Milwaukee. And I also saw the recent video that was released of the incident with Sterling. And unfortunately, this is not unusual in this state. This is not unusual in the city of Milwaukee. Starbucks has been in the news lately because of their racist profiling of 2 African Americans who were going there to have a business meeting. But there was a black man killed in Milwaukee who had been ejected from a Starbucks. That's not just an issue for our brothers and sisters from the African American community. This isn't just an issue for Black Lives Matter activists. This should be an issue that all of us care about. Because when we're told that law enforcement is there to protect and serve, that's what they should be doing. They shouldn't be killing unarmed people. They shouldn't be going after people with significant mental challenges with their guns drawn, or by tasing people before asking other questions. I'm glad that these professional athletes are speaking out, but it's a mistake to think that they represent the class of people that are most vulnerable. It's ordinary people, and it's not just black people. It's poor people. It's immigrants. There is a war not just on undocumented immigrants in this country, but also on legal immigrants. We have a situation, an unconscionable situation right now with the ICE agency in this country and these forced family separations. You all read, I'm sure, that they converted this Walmart in Texas to be a detention facility where they can take so-called unaccompanied minors. Let's get one thing clear here, and you won't see this from Trump, and you won't see it on Fox News. Many of these people who are coming here with their children, who become unaccompanied because they're taken away from their parents, they're not just sending the kids here. There was a 56-week-old baby brought into court recently without a parent, whose parent was in a jail. This is not just about people illegally wanting to cross into the United States and steal the jobs from American workers. In fact, most of the people that do come that way are doing jobs that many American workers don't do and won't do. But these are people who are fleeing violence in their own countries. They're fleeing a violence that our own government has helped to facilitate and create in the first place. They are people seeking help from our nation. They are not coming here to take your job. They are coming here because they are refugees of war. And all the Democrats and Republicans like to talk about how we're a nation of immigrants. And they like to quote the Statue of Liberty. And there is that history here. It's a complicated one. Africans didn't end up here, as Malcolm X said, they didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on them. But for many people, for my grandparents, they fled violence in Ireland, where we just recently traveled back to trace our family roots, and it's clear that my father's father was in trouble with the British, and he intentionally misspelled his name on his passport to get out of Ireland. He was welcomed with open arms in this country, and then treated like the dirt of society. There was a point where the Irish were the ones that they beat up on, and there was a point where the Italians were the ones, and on and on. And now we've gotten to a point where we basically have people in power from both political parties who have terrible policies on both legal and undocumented immigration, and they have shredded any legitimacy to the claim that we are a nation of immigrants by fiat and law. I'm going to talk a lot about Trump today, but before I do that, I want to say one thing. Barack Obama deported record numbers of people. Now, at the very end of his administration, and he did this with the drone program too, he tried to say, oh, well, we're going to switch this, we're going to change this, I'm going to, for the next person, make sure that I box them in, and he failed to do that. And part of why we have Trump and Sessions doing these things is because many liberals were asleep at the wheel during the 8 years of Obama. Would I rather have Barack Obama negotiating with Kim Jong-un? Absolutely. But there's a silver lining in this whole situation with Trump that I'm going to get to in a moment. Before I get into the meat of what we're going to discuss today, I just wanted to give one brief shout out to the publisher of the Progressive magazine, my good friend Norman Stockwell, who is here. Norm. You can get 3 copies of the Progressive. It remains one of the most important political magazines in this country. They have copies out front, and in this issue, there's very good coverage of Mexico, of farm workers, looking at local to Wisconsin all the way to global. So I encourage people not only to pick it up, but support your own independent media in this state. It is so vital at this time when there is this incredible consolidation of thinking. It's not just about media ownership. It's a consolidation of groupthink. On Fox News, they're in a different planet. Hillary Clinton is president, and she's the only story that should be covered. But then on MSNBC, it's Russia, 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 Russia. We've got 9 wars going on in the world right now. You wouldn't know that from watching MSNBC primetime. It's just about Trump, and it's just about Russia. In fact, one of the most dangerous aspects of the Trump presidency, of course, is his attack on the idea of a free media and the adoption, and I don't say this lightly, of literally of the tactics of Joseph Goebbels and the Nazi propaganda machine. Steve Bannon, Steve Miller, they studied the Nazis. They studied what they did in the early 30s to delegitimize the press. At the same time, MSNBC has caught Trump derangement syndrome, where nothing is true anymore except Trump is the beginning and end of all evil. That's a disservice to a democratic society. We are all, everyone in this room is capable of holding multiple thoughts at once. We need media that treat people seriously and understand all of you are people that care about the world. You can hold 2, 3, 4, 7 thoughts at the same time. We don't need to be coddled and propagandized, especially from our allies. So, I'm bored with talking about Fox News. We get their role in this society. We know who they are. I'm more concerned about the media outlets that maybe many of us respect in this room. It's a big problem when you have such a bifurcation in society drawn on such rigid lines. They're playing into Trump's hand. This whole Russia thing, which is a serious investigation, and it should be investigated. But that is not the only story in town. We're here talking about energy issues. Trump just ripped up the Iran deal. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are waging a genocidal war against the poorest nation in the Arab world, Yemen. And what is the common factor in the Iran situation and the Saudi situation? Well, on the one hand, it's Israel, support for Israel. On the other hand, it's the regime change agenda in Iran. I'm going to tell you something that I'm sure all of you have heard of, but then I'm going to tell you something else about it that I bet most of you didn't know. Everybody remembers who General Michael Flynn was, Donald Trump's original national security advisor. He was around for like 20 minutes, and then he went down, he lied to the FBI, and you don't hear from him anymore. Well, we all know, this whole thing, General Flynn was on the phone talking to Russians, and U.S. intelligence picked up these intercepts, and they were colluding with Russia. It's true, General Flynn was on the phone with Russian government officials, including Sergei Kislyak, the Russian ambassador to the United States. What you don't hear much about is what did they talk about. They didn't talk about ruining Hillary Clinton. They didn't talk about subverting American democratic processes. They talked about Israel. They talked about the United Nations Security Council vote that was coming up. Obama was still president. And the Obama administration, because they grew a spine like in the last 3 months of their time in power, were going to abstain, not even against, abstain on a vote condemning Israeli settlements. So what Michael Flynn was doing was colluding with the Russians to advocate for Israel's position at the United Nations. Yet you don't hear any peep about investigating Israeli collusion or actively undermining the democratically elected sitting president of the United States by trying to get a foreign power, Russia, to take Israel's position at the UN Security Council to undermine the current president of the United States. That is an epic scandal. And only recently did Mueller start poking around it. It's been Russia, Russia, Russia. 22 or 23 people have been indicted so far in this probe, but none of them represents any form of a smoking gun showing us much of anything about Russian collusion, is the word they like to use, but what they're really talking about is criminal conspiracy. We haven't seen that yet. We have evidence of Russian cyber operations aimed at attacking software companies that service the voting process in states. That's real. That should be investigated. Who did that? Well, we don't know yet from the forensics. Did Vladimir Putin do it? I wouldn't be surprised. Have they proven it? No. We can prove Israeli collusion. We also know now that in October of 2016, there was a secret meeting at Trump Tower that was organized by the founder of Blackwater, Eric Prince, whose sister is Betsy DeVos, the education secretary who appears to be quite uneducated herself. He sets up a meeting in October of 2016 at Trump Tower. And who was at that meeting? Donald Trump Jr., a guy named George Nader, who is an American citizen from Michigan, who has been a secret U.S. envoy of sorts for the United States in the Middle East going back to Bill Clinton. He's also a convicted pedophile in the Czech Republic and faced similar charges in this country. He is now one of the main liaisons for the Emirati royals. He was representing Mohammed bin Nayef, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, at this meeting, as well as Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. George Nader was there at this meeting, October 2016, with Eric Prince, Don Jr., the representative for the Saudis in UAE, and an Israeli company staffed by former Mossad and Shin Bet agents that specializes in disinformation and propaganda. And they were discussing ways that they could collectively support the Trump election. This is all indisputably true, and yet gets a tiny fraction of the attention of General Flynn's phone calls, which it turns out were actually about Israel. I'm bringing this up because we've lost our minds under this guy. This whole new Cold War mentality. The idea that Putin the bear has risen again and the KGB is all up in your emails. That's the world right now. Everyone is in everyone's emails. Are the Russians doing offensive cyber attacks around the world? Yes. You know who else is? We are. You know who else is? Israel is. India is. China is. All of these countries do it. And this isn't whataboutism. This is about let's see the facts before we lose our heads and act like we go back to the Cold War. We're talking about nuclear powers in a very serious conflict where the United States has prominent politicians asserting that Russia has committed an act of war against the United States by interfering in our election. My God, if that is true, I fear for our world. But is it true? We don't know yet. But when you say that, people say, oh, you're a Trump apologist. I don't apologize for Trump. Not one bit. But what I'm committed to is facts. And Trump, yes, we have to cover him factually. The truth as we know it about Trump already is criminally insane. I mean, it is off the charts. Never seen something like this where you have this kind of oligarchic gangster out in the open. He's doing the official corruption stuff that's legalized, and the guy has a walking violation of the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution. Should he be impeached? Yes, he should be impeached. But that's not the whole story. The Democratic Party has a PhD in blowing it. And it's got to change. It's got to change. You have it here in Wisconsin too, and we're seeing it across the country. Black people are running for office, women are running for office, immigrants are running for office. So many people from diverse communities are running for office, and some of them have the audacity to challenge the old guard of the Democratic Party. They are challenging Democratic incumbents who basically should be paying rent in the U.S. Capitol because they live there, not in their districts. These young people, these immigrants, these people of color, these women are challenging them. And you would think, because Hillary Clinton was telling everybody this, the DNC was telling everyone this, we want you all to run for office, we want women to run, we want young people to run. They sound so great. So many people took them up on the offer. And they said, all right, I'll do it. We have an amazing young candidate in Queens, New York named Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's one of the, I don't remember being so inspired by a politician, particularly one running for one of the nominations of one of the two major parties in this country. But she really seems like the real deal. Who is she running against? She's running against Representative Joe Crowley. Representative Joe Crowley is called the King of Queens. He runs a political machine. He inherited his congressional seat. He didn't even win the election the first time. He's been in Washington for 2 decades, and he is one of the people that has been identified as a successor to Nancy Pelosi. He is scared shitless right now because a 28-year-old Puerto Rican woman from Bronx, New York, is now neck and neck with him in the poll, and she cleaned his clock last night in a televised debate in New York. So you would think Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton, all these people would say, that's the kind of candidate we want. Energizing young people, getting Democratic Socialists of America endorsement, but also getting mainstream Democratic Club nominations. That's the kind of candidate you want if you want to change the Democratic Party. They all endorse Joe Crowley, who is an old white man whose kids don't even go to school in his district. They go to private school in Virginia. You know, Mr. Smith, it was Mr. Smith goes to Washington, now Mr. Smith moves to Washington. So in race across race, in this country, that's what you see happening. Steny Hoyer, who is the head of the DCCC, has been caught on tape trying to intimidate progressive candidates out of races where they're challenging incumbent Democrats. Listen, if that party doesn't get the message soon, what Steve Bannon prophesied is going to come true. There will be a civil war among progressives in this country. And the good that could come out of it is it will shatter what is right now a corporate party run by people who have been too wrong for too long. And you're going to push young people away from any kind of collective organizing. People beat up on Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, and say, Jill Stein lost Wisconsin. Did Jill Stein tell Hillary Clinton not to set foot in this state? Did Vladimir Putin hack into Hillary Clinton's travel schedule and remove Wisconsin? No, no. Did Vladimir Putin mess up the recall situation and the union leadership and taking people away from direct action and funneling them into that recall? No, this wasn't Russian interference. This wasn't Jill Stein. This was the tired tactics of a Democratic Party that takes all of your votes for granted. They take the votes of black people for granted, of immigrants for granted, of working people for granted. I wasn't shocked that Donald Trump won here. I was very upset about it, but I wasn't shocked. I was talking to friends who said, it's tough when you go into parts of this state, you don't see a Hillary sign anywhere. That's not the fault of the voters of Wisconsin. The point of politicians is they have to win your vote. There was an amazing article in the New York Times a couple of days after Trump won that election. And yeah, Hillary Clinton beat him by 3 million votes, but the Democrats played the dirty game of the Electoral College too. So you make the bed, you sleep in it. I mean, in many countries, Hillary Clinton would be president, but that's not how it works here. There was a front page piece in the New York Times about Milwaukee, and they were interviewing African-American men in barbershops in Milwaukee. And so many of them were saying, I voted for Clinton both times, I voted for Obama both times, I don't have much to show for it. My life didn't change too much, and I'm just sick of them. I'm sick of all of them. How on earth do you have two people who voted twice for Obama and then voted for Donald Trump? It makes no sense in conventional thinking. It makes no sense, except people were rejecting the idea that America should have a monarchy. We don't want Bushes and Clintons anymore. We don't want elitists telling us what to do or how to vote. I think Bernie Sanders would have won the state of Wisconsin against Donald Trump. But if you watch MSNBC, I told you before, on Fox, Hillary won the election. Sometimes on MSNBC, it's like Jill Stein won the election. They go after her, accusing her of all manner of things, and they never want to look at the root cause, which is that the Democratic nominee ran a corporate campaign that was trying to catch up with the tide of progressives in this country, and it was a dime short and a day late for that campaign. They can't just say, we get your vote. People who say, oh, Ralph Nader was responsible for the 2000 election. No, Al Gore was responsible for what happened in the 2000 election, not Ralph Nader, not Jill Stein. We need to get over this sort of cultish groupthink that we're being programmed with on our own, on what's supposed to be liberal media. We need to think critically. This North Korea situation, perfect example. For whatever reason, ego, showcasing, whatever, Donald Trump fixates on the idea, I'm going to do this thing with Kim Jong-un. And he's leading people in chants of Nobel, And he said, yes, what are they saying? It's Nobel. I can't hear you. So Trump is trying, he thinks he's Nixon in China. He's going to win the Nobel Prize. You can move a little bit faster, the light's getting up. I'll come over for the next speaker and sit on But think about this. Sean Hannity, Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham, all these Fox News, Fox and Friends. By the way, Fox and Friends, there's no journalists. It's a weatherman, a sports guy, and then they have a rotating cast of women that look identical to each other. But there really are different people over the years. You just wouldn't know it. That's the most important show in the country right now, is a weatherman, a sports guy, and a rotating cast of women that are supposed to look a certain way. And President will call in. None of these people are anymore calling for the total destruction of North Korea. That was like Fox bread and butter for years and years. My view on this is if Donald Trump somehow, through his bumbling and fumbling, has managed to stop Fox News from agitating for just one war, let's say, all right, that's great, we want to keep it that way. I actually don't care much about, Trump meeting with Kim. You see the picture of Trump saluting the general, and Trump said, oh, take pictures, make us look thin and handsome, and Trump doesn't speak the English language fluently. And do people like Kim Jong-un, when they sit down, Kim Jong-un is like using 5-syllable words, in his answer that have some historical context to them, and Trump's just like, isn't this great? Isn't his hair great? Isn't this it's all great. Look at how many of you are here. It's just great. We went to Mall of Singapore yesterday. It was just fantastic. It's like, how on earth is Kim Jong-un smarter than the President of the United States and more articulate? It's really like a problem. But, all right, so setting aside the joking. South Korea, it's South Korea. For much of its time in the modern era was under military dictatorship. Right-wing military dictatorship, bolstered, backed, armed, funded by the United States. The Korean War, which is one of the least discussed wars in American history, 3 million Koreans killed. At the time of that war, there were 14 or 15 cities in North Korea that were significant population centers. The United States destroyed all of them, leveled Pyongyang to the ground, used biological weapons and chemical weapons, killed more people than were killed in a much longer war than Vietnam. People don't understand the context. They're weighing in, pundits are weighing in, talking about North Korea nukes. How many of them actually understand why North Korea invaded South Korea? Understand that North Korea has a border with Russia, has a border with China, was seeing, the Soviet sphere of influence was seeing the United States moving further and further east. I don't defend it. Any invasion of a country is categorically wrong. The North Koreans, technically and in a real way, started that war. But it was not in a vacuum. There was war gaming going on. And the United States was not directly attacked by North Korea, and yet involved itself in that war and came in with massive overkill. We don't talk about that history. We don't talk about the history of how the United States, at several turns, key moments throughout history, was the saboteur of the negotiations. Now, who's the president of South Korea? He's a fairly left-wing guy. Some call him a leftist, but on domestic issues in South Korea, the South Korean left is very upset with him on a range of issues. But he won in a landslide and has massive popular support. And one of the reasons he has popular support is he ran on a pledge to end the Korean War. He ran on a pledge to try to have a denuclearized Korean peninsula. His name is Moon Jae-in. Moon Jae-in is the actual hero of this story right now. But you don't hear much about that on the news. Moon Jae-in was the first person to say maybe Trump should get the Nobel Peace Prize. Do you really think Moon Jae-in, an extremely well-educated guy, a student of world history, who has been a negotiator on the issue of nuclear weapons on the Korean Peninsula for many, many years, you really think he thinks Trump should get the Nobel Prize? No. He is masterfully fluffing Trump. And it's a mistake. If you didn't know who Moon Jae-in was before I just said his name, you should research it before opening your mouth about the North Korea situation, because there is a complicated diplomatic strategy playing out here. In the same way I said, if Trump can get Fox to stop calling for dropping a nuke on North Korea, if Moon Jae-in fluffs Trump and Trump goes and he makes an ass of himself with Kim Jong-un, but it ultimately results in Moon Jae-in being able to accomplish denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula, how could we be against it? But that's not the story we're being told by the Democrats. Chuck Schumer responds to this by basically saying there should be more sanctions, double down on what we're doing with North Korea if they even blink funny at us next time. That's a big mistake. It's a tactical mistake, and it's part of what I call Trump derangement syndrome. We can't see what's in front of us because he's so heinous. And I don't blame people. I'm more frightened of Trump using a nuke than I am of Kim Jong-un. I think that, I say that as a parent and as somebody who is extremely concerned about our environment and our world, and about the fact that if Trump did use a nuke, or if a nuke was used on the Korean Peninsula, Korea would cease to exist. I don't mean north side, I mean the whole of Korea. The stakes are so high with this guy that I understand why people have sort of lost their minds about it. We have a stormtrooper type operation at our border. We have a president who tells law enforcement to slam the heads of people they're arresting on the car doors. We have an attorney general who believes that he was put there by God, and that God wants him to separate children from mothers at border crossings. We have a Christian fascist aspect of this administration, and when I say Christian, I mean warped Christians, because the Bible that I read doesn't justify the policies that Donald Trump and his administration are engaged in. We have an expansion of our military operations to even more countries than Obama. And Obama was a very belligerent, hawkish, expansionist empire president. Trump has almost surpassed, in his less than 2 years in office, all of the number of civilians killed under 8 years of Obama. And I was screaming from the top of my lungs every day under that administration, in part because it was hypocrisy, in part because it's Obama he's so smart, he is a constitutional law scholar, he won the Nobel Prize. You expect more from people like Obama than you do people like Trump. But Trump is going beyond even the wildest imagination of the John Boltons and neocons of the world. He is taking all of the rules of engagement for the military and the CIA and ripping them up. Obama had a threshold that had to be met when large numbers of civilians were going to be killed. There were a few episodes that you can identify from Obama where 32 civilians were killed or 25 civilians were killed. And it was atrocious, and it was a war crime. But at the same time, there was some standard that was there. And then those operations had to be signed off directly by the President of the United States. With Trump, he talks about his generals all the time. The CIA, now run by a torturer, Gina Haspel, the CIA and the military are in a golden era right now. And they're in a golden era because Trump is president, because the guy doesn't want to read his intelligence briefings. You know, every president is presented with what's called the PDB, the Presidential Daily Briefing. And each administration caters it how they want the commander-in-chief to receive it. Obama's would be like 100 pages long every day. He would want to see raw transcripts of intercepts. He would want to know what are our allies doing about this. He wanted to know everything before he made decisions. And I'm not saying this, I certainly was not a fan of Obama. I'm just stating the fact. Obama was careful. He read his reports. Trump, they can be no longer than 2 pages. They have to have bullet points and graphics, cartoons or pictures or something. And the CIA, some of the CIA personnel that are involved with preparing this presidential daily brief for Trump have told journalists that they insert Trump's name into the intelligence reports if it's really important and they want to make sure that he reads it. Because the first thing he always does when he reads something is look for what are they saying about me, what are my reviews. Imagine being, a political analyst who's sort of dealing on the nuclear issue, and you have to figure out a way to write Donald Trump's name into like some dry analysis of ICBMs in a remote area of Russia. That's what they're having to spend their time doing now because the guy doesn't want to read it. He's deferring to the people that have everything to gain by expanding these wars. And at the same time, he puts his quiet little son-in-law, corrupt to the core, I guarantee you that guy's going down. He's somehow in charge of Israel-Palestine. This kid who is an open right-wing Zionist is in charge of let's make peace in Palestine. They announced that the U.S. Embassy is now officially in Jerusalem, and Donald Trump's name is on the building now. It's like in concrete. He put his own name on the building as his dedication. He did it. He did it on the day of the Nakba. He did it on the day that Palestinians remember as sort of the beginning of hell for them at the hands of Israeli forces. And then you had that day, as Jared Kushner and Ivanka were partying with their fancy canopies and toasting to Benjamin Netanyahu, 100 Palestinians were being gunned down. You think that's an accident? They did it on purpose. They chose that day knowing that the right of return march was happening and knowing that Netanyahu has a policy of shoot to kill. Netanyahu's then interviewed about it as part of the press gaggle for the opening of the U.S. Embassy, and he says, it's unfortunate when Hamas sends these people out there. We try to aim for below the knee when we shoot at them. He says this openly, and there was no challenge to that. There was no challenge from the American journalists interviewing Bibi, none of them. That's the state of sort of affairs right now, is there are certain sacred cows that you don't ever touch, Democrats and Republicans. The Democrats who dare to take it on often feel the full wrath of the institutional Democratic Party. Chuck Schumer, big-time supporter of all of this in Israel. He's one of the main people in charge of who runs for office and who doesn't, who gets funding and who doesn't, who gets committee assignments and who doesn't. This isn't a Republican, it's not Mitch McConnell. Chuck Schumer is doing this also. We have some real right-wing Democrats that are in some of the most powerful positions in our government. How on earth do we let them off the hook for failing to build an effective resistance to a cartoonishly bad villain? It's theirs to lose and they're losing it. And they're losing it because we don't have the spine to say we can do two things at once. We can oppose the fascistic strands that we see in this administration. We can oppose the Gestapo tactics being used to deport people, raid houses, and we can say to the Democratic Party, you don't represent working people in this country anymore if you ever did. And it's either we all go independent or you catch up with the times. Paul Ryan, of course, is no longer going to be Speaker of the House, and he's coming back here. Yay? Oh, yay that he's not going to be Speaker anymore. Well, now you get it back, or you and some, million corporate boards and everything. Paul Ryan is trying to do some revisionism right now. He was a major facilitator of the Trump presidency and the Trump moment. And now he's trying to sort of repair his image in the waning moments of his time as the third most powerful official in Washington. You, as residents, those of you that are from Wisconsin, should hound that guy. He shouldn't be allowed to just quietly go into the private sector now. He needs to answer for what they did to health care, for what the economic bill, for what they're doing to poor people, to working families in this country, to unaccountable wars. Paul Ryan should never be allowed to appear in public in this state without being confronted for what he did when he was sent there to Washington. But that's how we are in this society. It's why MSNBC has Bill Kristol, one of the most vile neocons in this country. He's on as a resistance, figure. He's resisting Trump. David Frum, who wrote The Axis of Evil Speech for Bush and promoted the myth of WMDs, he's on the liberal networks every day. Joy Reid is high-fiving them. What on earth is going on here? These people shouldn't be allowed to appear in public without answering for what they did to destroy Iraq. We have like amnesia. We forget so quickly the crimes of people who are supposed to be representing the people. That's part of why we're in this situation right now. Political courage means that your principles don't get checked at the door when the Democrat is in office or the Democrats control the Congress. That's when you double down and say, now's the time to show our principle. Let's push harder, let's challenge them. Send them home if they are not doing the will of the people, which is what so many of these progressive young candidates are doing. And what's the answer from the institutional Democratic Party? Go away. Don't do it. You're going to help Trump. They always say that. Well, if you criticize Obama, you're going to help McCain. If you criticize Obama, you're going to help Romney. If you criticize Hillary Clinton, you're going to... No. We can do multiple things at once. And we have to have the courage to actually believe it. We can. We can be critical of our own team. And I do consider Democrats roughly on the team of people about social justice because there are different parts of that party. But the institutional party has to be completely dismantled to the ground and all the rubble removed from this country. I want to be able to open this up so we can expand the discussion and people can ask questions or make brief comments if you want. And I say that, I realize I've been babbling on here, but just be respectful of your neighbors who want to also have a chance to speak, and try not to give a speech. If you have a question, great. If you have a brief comment, no problem. But let me say this in closing. We are at a major crossroads in the history of this country on multiple levels. When Trump gets up and he calls black athletes sons of bitches, what he's doing is he's calling black women bitches. When Trump stands up and says people should be fired because they refuse to stand for the national anthem, what he's doing is saying we don't really have free speech in this country. You see, I see what Trump is doing to wealthy, influential black athletes as a very symbolic message that's being sent to this whole country. He's saying, I can take LeBron James and Colin Kaepernick, and I can call them any name I want. It doesn't matter how much money they have. It's the same way that they used to talk about, we got to teach a lesson to those uppity Negroes with Dr. King. It's the same thing that he's doing. He knows what he's doing. He's not dog whistling to racism. He's foghorning. He is blowing the horn. And white people, too, have to understand this. Right now, it's black people in his crosshairs. Tomorrow, who knows who it's going to be? They will come for you next. One thing we know, dissent has a very rich history in this country. Refusing to stand for the flag or turning your back on it at times of crisis, at times of upheaval, at times when you're under attack, that's real. That's ingrained in the fabric of our country. And for the president to stake out that position in public, he knows exactly what he's doing. He knows who his audience is. And the Democratic Party does what? They do what about these issues? You know, when Black Lives Matter activists were running around the country chasing Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, both Hillary and Bernie did not respond in a way that showed any true respect for how so many black people in this country view the police with good reason. Instead, they tried to sort of, oh, we'll hire this person and that person. Bernie Sanders seems to be getting the message now. My colleague Sean King just wrote a piece about his evolution on race. But we can't just say, well, it's just Trump and the Republicans are racist. The Democrats also have a history, and I'm not talking about Senator Byrd being in the Ku Klux Klan. I'm talking about the modern Democratic Party. I'm talking about Clinton's crime bill. I'm talking about the Democratic position on immigration. I'm talking about Obama deporting millions of people. I'm talking about wars with no accountability. We can do two things at once. Make it so, Wisconsin. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you. Let's hear it for the people that have been giving us power throughout this event. I'm happy to hear your comments, criticisms, conspiracy theories, questions, recipes for salsa.
If you have a question for Jeremy, you can line up right here.
Also, I'd love it if we have some attempt at gender and racial balance, if it's possible, not just white men grabbing the microphone, but I mean, of course I want to hear from you too, but let's make sure that we have some diversity here. Go ahead. Great, a woman at first, go ahead.
I'm from Minnesota, and
We forgive you.
Keith Ellison will be our next Attorney General, I believe.
Yeah?
We don't know what that means.
And will
to
Ilhan
the
Omar,
DNC.
is Ilhan Omar going to win his seat?
Omar is going to run for one district.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, how specifically can states do the task that you're talking about of reforming the Democratic National Committee?
Well, reforming I wouldn't have been able to answer that, but for the last part of it. I mean, I think that look, just for thank you for bringing up Keith Ellison also. Just for context, in case people weren't following this, there was a war over who was going to run the Democratic National Committee in the aftermath of the Trump victory. And Tom Perez represented the Hillary Clinton wing of the Democratic Party, and Keith Ellison was representing, he was one of the first Congress members to endorse Bernie Sanders. He represented the Bernie Sanders wing of the party, and it was a very dirty campaign. It was, in fact, you saw the same tactics being used against Ellison that were revealed. People don't talk about this. What was the main thing that those WikiLeaks emails revealed? They revealed a lot of dirty tricks being done against Bernie Sanders' campaign. We talk a lot about Russia, and that stuff's in, but it was also a lot of dirty tricks about Bernie Sanders. That same thing happened. Tom Perez then becomes the chair of the DNC. At the very beginning, he was running it exactly like the old Bill Clinton machine. And Ellison then became his vice chair, and Ellison is always the guy whose name is on the fundraising appeals to young people. They don't put Tom Perez on it, they put Keith Ellison. That to me was an indication that the DNC as it currently exists needs to be crushed. And there needs to be some consensus building, much more democratic process of how they do it. That requires at the state level, in each state in this country, for progressives to run for positions on bureaucratic committees. People always say, think globally, organize locally. The Republicans became very good in the 70s and 80s at manipulating Robert's Rules of Order, boring bureaucracy, running for state government positions, running for prosecutor. Most district attorneys in this country run unopposed every time. Part of it is figuring out how are delegates chosen in your state. What are the committees? This isn't a sexy answer, but it's the truth. You have to get involved with really boring bureaucracy. The sexy part of it, though, or the more energized part of it, is challenging incumbent Democrats with progressives and getting behind them. Even if they lose, it is sending a message to them that this party is not going to withstand a mass revolt from all those people that voted for Bernie Sanders, just put it bluntly. If Bernie Sanders, we've been thinking of funding a poll of Democrats. The Intercept has been thinking of, I shouldn't say this out loud, but we've been thinking of funding a poll to see who do registered Democrats blame the most for the 2016 election. Jill Stein, Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton. I actually don't know what the top vote getting would be, because there's a toxic state right now in the institutional Democratic Party where Bernie Sanders remains, even though he's the most popular politician in the country, public enemy number one. On a state level in Wisconsin as well, you have so many regional political machines that need to be challenged. And it's not just about defeating the Republicans. Democrats play the politics of running scared a lot in this country. And they say, well, we have to run blue dog Democrats, or progressive can't win in that district. There's a lot of races that have happened recently that have sort of suggested that that's a wild miscalculation. So I don't have a direct answer for you, but I do think it's a combination of studying how decisions are made at the state level and getting people who actually are very good at bureaucracy to get involved with it, and then on a bigger picture, taking chances on renegade insurgent candidates as a way to start a real conversation in this country.
My question is kind of in the same vein. What's the best way to inspire people to get behind good candidates? But I'm a little afraid of bifurcating the best opposition to the Republicans. I think they're evil, and I think we've got to really kind of come together and coalesce, even if we don't like people. But I do like holding people accountable. So in that vein, or actually, you've given some great suggestions as to what we can all do. Let me just transition into who do you see now as a viable 2020 Democratic candidate?
Look, I think that just to address quickly the first part of your comment, and it echoes also some of what you were saying. I could get up and just give a rhetorical speech and everybody applaud, but I take seriously exactly what you said, which is there is a difference between Democrats and Republicans. I do believe that in general. I do think, particularly when you talk about domestic politics in the United States, there are just differences, and the Democrats are just much better on some very core issues. I would have much rather had Hillary Clinton picking Supreme Court justices, even though they probably would have been atrocious in so many ways. It's like we really could have a mixture of the Hunger Games and the Handmaid's Tale in this country because of who's on the Supreme Court. Like, that to me, if anybody said to me, I'm voting for Hillary because of the Supreme Court, end of conversation. I'm not going to argue with you. It makes sense. Those are life and death issues. At the same time, part of the way that the Republicans are able to push through their agenda is because enough right-wing Democrats jump on the bandwagon with them, and often in the Senate in particular, you're talking 1, 2, 3 votes. Joe Manchin, for instance, came out early and often in support of Gina Haspel for CIA director. That was another one of these confirmations that because libertarian Republicans were going to vote against Gina Haspel, people like Rand Paul, if 100% of the Democrats had voted against her, she probably wouldn't be CIA director right now, and there would be a real discussion and debate in this country about torture because you defeat someone who was involved with it. So, in general, I agree with you, and I certainly empathize with the horrors that come from the Republicans controlling 3 branches of government. But the more sort of general strategic, substantive part of your question, one of I mentioned it earlier, but one of the groups that I have found really inspiring and has forced me to start taking a look back at electoral politics, where I basically was like, I'm done with both of these parties. And I am not a Democrat. But the Democratic Socialists of America, it's been around for a very long time, for decades. But they have I think they've now broken 6 figures in their number of active dues-paying members in this country. And they're adopting a strategy of inside, outside the tent. They will not just fold over to Democratic incumbents who beat them in races, but they are running under the banner of the Democratic Party because they believe that the answer to your question is we need a bigger tent. The Big Ten almost always talks about we need room for right-wingers. You know, there is a solid left in this country. And I don't just mean liberals, I mean a solid left that is totally disenfranchised from anything having to do with the Democratic Party, wants nothing to do with the Democratic Party. Mainstream Democrats can make a decision. You either want to bring them in by making serious concessions to progressive agendas, or you want them to go to war against you and run third-party candidates. So part of what I keep alluding to this idea that, you know, part of what Steve Bannon said about the Democratic Party and the Civil War wouldn't be that bad, but in the immediate term it probably would be a catastrophe because the Republicans could win. But that benefits the establishment Democrats. One last thing in answer. Here's a hypothetical. When Bernie Sanders lost or had the nomination taken from him, depending on how you look at it, I know, because I had friends high up in that campaign, I know that Bernie was seriously considering a third-party run against Hillary Clinton. I don't think that was the most likely scenario he was pursuing, but it was serious enough that they actually had many, many meetings about it. I believe that had Bernie Sanders done that, Trump would have won, and the Democrats and history would have said, oh, it's because of Bernie Sanders. But it would have forever changed the Democratic Party. It would have shattered the existing Democratic Party into a million little pieces. And I believe that it would have been, that there would have been something built out of that that was better. So we got Trump with Hillary Clinton. You know, is history blaming her? Is she blaming herself? No. But oh my God, they would have crushed Bernie Sanders if he lost as a two-candidate race, and certainly if he did a third-party race. So part of it, I think, is at some point in our history, some candidate has to have the audacity to break with the two major parties and see just how many independent thinkers are here. And it will require, unfortunately, the left probably uniting strategically with libertarians that they don't like on a bunch of issues. But that's probably the only way to shatter the system, unless there's a revolt within the Democratic Party that has as its goal preserving the name Democratic Party but changing the foundation of it. So those are the two ways I can see it. But thanks for the thoughtful question. In 2020, Kamala Harris looks like she's going to run. Bernie Sanders is, well, you know, Kamala Harris is a former prosecutor. I will give her credit. She is listening, and she's moving further and further to the left. She asked some of the best questions of Gina Haspel. She's very right-wing on a lot of criminal justice issues and on some foreign policy issues, but she seems to be recognizing which way the wind is blowing. Sanders is still the candidate to beat, and you know, I wish he wasn't an old white man, you know, because it's a problem. It really is a problem, and I think it does turn off, you know, voters. But you know, Bernie earned it. You know, he earned his stripes to be considered viable as a candidate. I don't mean he earned the right to be the nominee. I mean he earns the right to be in the arena. So I think there will be an interesting field where you'll have Elizabeth Warren, even though she's denying it. Maybe she's going to jump into it. Elizabeth Warren, I think, would stand a strong chance. Kamala Harris, I think I would put her as the front runner right now because the Democrats know that the institutional party is in crisis and they need something that's not a Clinton, and they need someone who's not a white man, particularly an old one. The other side, the most progressive person that would run there is Bernie Sanders. So Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, I don't know. We'll see. Go ahead, Matt.
Freedom of speech should not mean freedom of hate speech.
Yes.
Freedom of speech is not equal to everyone in this nation. How can we have a country that allows Nazis to be marching, and you know, how can we say it's freedom of speech across the board? I struggle with that.
Yeah. Well, you know, there's a real generational split on this. I mean, you know, obviously, the position you're staking out is one that my colleagues in their 20s they all are about that, no free speech for Nazis, and it's, you know, a lot of millennials are very militant on that. And you had, you know, Richard Spencer when he got punched in the face, you know, this sort of reprehensible little rat who is, you know, open white nationalist, white supremacist. He got punched, and there was like these memes that went viral of setting it to music when his face gets hit, and you know, and then it's like, oh, Nazis should be punched. Okay, I get it, and it's like, do I have a problem with people, you know, using physical violence to stop fascists? No, I don't. But there are laws that prohibit you from punching other people. So in a way, it's sort of like, you know, you're going to break unjust laws if you feel like it's in the greater good, and I think that is part of the mentality there. the problem with not taking an absolutist view on free speech issues is that it comes back to bite you every time. There were eras in this country where it was the left or liberals or people of color or women who were being told what was appropriate and not appropriate speech. And yes, those people were not openly marching with swastikas and advocating fascism, but precedents get set at the Supreme Court that become very difficult to undo. And so we have this challenge, and you so rightly, I think, called the point on it. What do you do when strategically you don't want to give the right a victory by saying the left is limiting speech, and then they use it against you during a period like this where they have control of all three branches of government and confronting fascism in this country? My personal view is that if we have legitimate fascist movements in this country, that we have an obligation to confront those people regardless of what the law says, but we have to be willing to accept the consequences for it. If you start legislating what can and can't be said outside of something that causes imminent harm, my fear is that it's going to harm us more than them. And so I don't have a direct answer for you other than I struggle with the same issue. Strategically, I think it's a bad idea to try to limit their speech. Tactically, I don't want them to speak. So what do you do with that? What it really puts in front of us all as a question of conscience is, what is the most effective way to confront fascism in our society? And that, I feel like that's a debate that a lot of people are having. I know you're probably unsatisfied with my answer, but I mean, I've studied this a lot. I fear that it would be tactically unwise for progressives, Democrats, the left, to stake out a position banning someone from marching with a swastika. I think it would bite us. And it's not because I want to see a swastika. I hope somebody goes and rips it up. And I hope that they're willing to understand that they're probably going to get arrested for it. But I would say that those are prisoners of conscience if they do it. Legislating it, saying only 5 people can gather if they have that's the right that does that stuff. And it makes me nervous, but I don't have a good answer for you other than I think we shouldn't tactically limit speech and we should break unjust laws. If somebody has a better idea, I'm all ears. Yes, ma'am.
I want to tell you, first of all, I am so enthralled with you and with your presentation. I thought it was just absolutely awesome.
I saw you nodding your head. You were giving me inspiration.
I teach history in Freeport, Illinois, and I've taught.
Wow.
Yeah,
thank you for being a teacher.
I taught race and ethnicity for like 5 years in humanities class, but I wanted to find out, I was really intrigued with the fact that, you kind of almost halfway quoted Baldwin when you talked about, if you come for me in the morning, if they come for you in the morning, they'll come for me in the afternoon. And that's what I wanted to really ask you. How do you feel like what is the best methods, best tactics, especially dealing with white Americans, to explain to them these issues of, the police violence, the racism, what we see with the Starbucks cases, and calling the police all the time, and just myriad, Trayvon Martin, that these things are not just a threat to people of color, but eventually these things will wind up happening. Your nephew with blonde hair and blue eyes, will get shot by the police too. It's just a matter of time because you've given them this power and authority because everything they do is right. So I just was wondering how you speak to that, how would you address that to try to get that message out into where it's more comprehensive?
That's a very deep question. My immediate answer is I don't know. I don't have that answer, but I'll share it with some thoughts that came to mind as you were talking. One of the sort of telltale signs of the desperation of authoritarianism is this open encouragement to punch down in society, that it's always the people below you that are the problem. And in a nutshell, that's what this presidency is doing in this country and around the world, encouraging people to look for who is below them, nipping at their ankles, and to say, those are the biggest threat in your life right now. And the demographics in this country are changing. In The Fire Next Time, Baldwin also talks about how this world is no longer white and shall never be white again. That's true in this country too. And eventually the demographics are going to shift. And generations from now, it's quite possible that America will appear as an apartheid state in the world if the current power structure remains in force. And one of the things that I think about often is The Chicago Police Department right now is at a state where it's almost more than half, it may have already crossed it, non-white officers. Yet the Chicago Police Department is one of the most racist in this country, with a history of torture, abuse, extrajudicial killing. What has happened, though, is that the police culture has taken over from people's immediate concerns about their community, and you see this in New York too, where black officers are put in a position where they have to be more rough than their white colleagues. And so the issue of race starts to be intentionally made into a schizophrenic moment for people who say, I want to get into law enforcement so that police look more like the people in our community. A lot of times the pressure on those police officers is great. So it's not entirely a question of race. Right now, overwhelmingly it is. But poor people in this country, people who can't pay for their house, they also face increasingly paramilitarized police forces in this country. My direct answer is, the war on terror has come home to the United States with all of its tactics, the surveillance that's available to the police, the SWAT teams that now, the Department of Agriculture has a SWAT team now. Why on earth does the Department of Agriculture need a SWAT team? All these entities are becoming paramilitarized. White people right now go to a protest and maybe some people think, oh, the government's watching us, they're going to take us. There was a time in history where the government was watching you white people and was taking you. That can happen very quickly when the police mentality takes over the nation. And I'm not going to offer platitudes about, oh, there's good officers. We know, but that's not the point. The point is the bad actors and the system. The system is being paramilitarized. It's not about white or black, and it's the system now is being paramilitarized. They're coming for the immigrants. They're coming for people of color right now. They will come for dissident white people. They will, and they will use the means of the state to do it. So it's a mistake to say, oh, well, that's because the black people and they're killing each other, and they love to talk about Chicago. It will come for you one day. It will if you don't stand with the people that it's there for right now.
I was thinking you could say a little bit more about the situation in Yemen and the U.S. role in it, because I don't think it's gotten a lot of media coverage. And is there anything us American citizens can do about it?
Part of the reason I've spent quite a bit of time in Yemen, and I love that country, and it's one of the most amazing places I've ever been, and it's being systematically destroyed. Some of the oldest longest standing structures in the world are in Yemen. The oldest mosque in the world is in Yemen. They've all been damaged, bombed, or destroyed in this war. Sorry. The position that the United States has taken, and that most Democrats and Republicans in the Congress take, is that the Iranian government is using the Houthi rebels that took control of the capital Sana'a as a proxy force. WikiLeaks cables released by Chelsea Manning, or leaked by Chelsea Manning under Bush, showed that the Bush administration internally was saying to the Yemeni government, the dictator at the time, there's no Iranian support for the Houthis. You're trying to use that to get us into your civil war. Bush's Homeland Security team said definitively there is no Iranian support for the Houthis. What the United States, the Saudis, and the Emiratis have done now is draw Iran into an active war. Now there is Iranian military support to the Houthis. Now Iran does have personnel inside of Yemen. The whole endgame there is actually about Israel and about Iran regime change, but the Yemeni people pay the price. Hundreds of thousands of cases of cholera, and it's going up and up and up. I think it hit over 1 million now. It's a tiny country. Over 1 million cases of cholera. Naval blockade. Supplies can't get in. In addition to the Saudi bombing with U.S. weapons, U.S. air support, U.S. refueling, and U.S. intelligence, the U.S. is continuing to drone bomb Yemen. In fact, I'll give you a great riddle. The United States is killing Al-Qaeda, who is killing the Houthis. The United States is on both sides of that war yet again. Al-Qaeda is fighting the Houthis. The United States is fighting the Houthis. The United States is fighting Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is the ground force fighting the Houthis in large parts of the south of Yemen. It's really reminiscent of past conflicts. Like Henry Kissinger famously quipped that we should arm both Iran and Iraq so they kill each other off. The U.S. is on multiple sides in this war. And my God, Yemen has no weaponry to speak of. They don't have an air force. They don't have tanks. There is no organized military. Who pays the price? Women, children, overwhelmingly. Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, one of the best people on this, you know, and that's not saying much, but he's one of the best. I would find out, what is your politician's stance on this, and make it an issue to flip them on it. It is doable. The United States could, the Congress could, because some Republicans support this too, could cut off all U.S. military assistance. There's 2 bills in the House right now that would do that to the Saudis. But Saudis have oil, Saudis are friends, Saudis have big control over OPEC. OPEC is a big problem for the U.S. if it doesn't price oil the way the U.S. wants it. So this isn't just about a long-standing thing with the royals. This also has to do with international oil politics and who controls OPEC. But unforgivable crime that's happening right now. And if you're a member of Congress or your senators, I mean, Ron Johnson, forget about it, but I would check what is Tammy Baldwin's position on this. I don't know what her position is. You guys presumably can find that out very quickly and call her out on it. So that's one area where I think that calling your Congress member actually does make a difference. There have been multiple members of Congress who came out and supported that bill, which is sponsored by Representative Ro Khanna, because of constituent calls. So that's an area where actually the best thing you can do for the Yemeni people who are being killed is make it your commitment to flip whoever your representative is if they're bad on this issue.
Thank you. There's so many groups fighting for justice, for peace, for a sustainable world, on and on and on, for human rights, for human needs. Can you talk about coming together? I'm with a group called Building Unity. Actually, we're not a group, we're a project that's owned by many groups, and trying to build one big movement based on issues, not partisan, but trying to pull us all together.
Well, my friend and brother who's standing right behind you, George Martin, probably can speak to that too, especially on a state level. You know, part of what, for me, it's a little complicated to be talking as much as I did about the Democratic Party in a positive sense, but I've been moved by so many young people to, in a tactical way, start looking at ways in which, tactically, I'm honest, I am not a Democrat, but I would say that I am really moved by the rebellious, insurgent, smart spirit of so many young people challenging the old guard. And whether they do it through the Green Party or an independent party, or they do it through the Democrats, that's a matter of conscience for them, but the system is the way it is right now. And if you can take down right-wing Democrats with a progressive democratic socialist, I'll take that, that's great. But you're asking more about grassroots. To me, the greatest failure of the sort of broader anti-war movement in this country post 9/11, and it's not that there weren't people that tried, was building connections and alliances with people who were facing down violence in their communities in the United States. And all of us, I'm sure, have been in peace meetings where people say, you know, how come no people of color are coming to these meetings? How come no young people are coming to these meetings? You know, I now have gray hair. I used to be one of the people challenging them. But if you study it and you realize, what are the issues that matter to this generation? What are the issues that matter right now to people living in the 53206 area code in Milwaukee, the most incarcerated area code in the United States of America? What has the peace movement done to go to those communities and try to build with them? I know George Martin, who's here, does that work, but there's not a lot of people who have. So part of it is meeting people where the struggle is, not pouring all of your resources into electoral politics. At the end of the day, that's just one flank in what needs to be a multi-pronged attack against the sort of imperial state. But we do have to engage in it. We can't just say, oh, that doesn't exist. I'd rather have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez be a congressperson than Joe Crowley. That doesn't mean I've become a Democrat. It means that I tactically think those are the kind of people that should be in Washington. And right now, we're not going to have the perfect socialist utopian candidates running. So you go to the dance with the person you're with. I mean, that's sort of how it works. But the moment you start ceding your conscience to a politician is the moment you stop fighting. So I would say that it's really understanding where the struggle is and going there,
finding ways to relate what are your issues that are important, finding, no matter how small it is, a bridge to the struggles other people are having, and being willing to engage in tactical alliances. Libertarians, who I despise on some issues, are better than the mainstream Democrats on criminal justice issues. The Cato Institute is much better on criminal justice issues than the Democratic Party is. I'll say it out loud. The Koch brothers are better on many criminal justice issues than the average establishment Democrat. And I think the Koch brothers are major enemies of democracy in this country, but they're really good on drugs and criminal justice. So should we just say, fuck the Koch brothers? Yeah, that's fine. That's a defensible position. But on those, if your issues are criminal justice, if you got a loved one in prison, libertarians are actually doing a lot more to try to dismantle the system there than a lot of mainstream Democrats. So it's also willing to take a step back from our own politics of purity and say, who do we make tactical alliances with? The only people I don't think we should ever make a tactical alliance with are people who are fascists and who are open fascists. And that goes back to the question about free speech. I think we do have a risk in this country of a fascist mentality spreading in parts of this society. We already see it. We saw it in Charlottesville, where DeAndre Harris was beaten almost to death in a parking garage next to the Charlottesville Police Department. He was attacked by a mob, and the police didn't arrest anyone. The FBI didn't arrest anyone until activists, African-American activists and journalists, started putting pictures of these people online. The FBI had to go and arrest them. It's like what used to happen in Mississippi burning. The FBI and the Kennedys didn't care about it. It was the civil rights movement and the primarily black-led activism in the South that forced them to come down there and do what little they ended up doing. You have to force these people, shame them into doing their jobs. Tactical alliances, build bridges, meet people where the struggle is.
Jeremy, thank you.
Do people know who George Martin is? The legendary peace activist, anti-war activist, and justice.
Jeremy, you've been my inspiration from the very beginning in terms of the Iraq War. But I'll tell you, standing in line here, I've changed my subject matter about 6 times. Because you hit on it, you hit me. You know, and as a leader of the peace movement, for 8 years during the Iraq War, I take a lot of personal responsibility for what
George,
happened.
why don't you come up here? So
you know, and I just want to make it
come up here so people can see you, so you're not just talking with your back turned. In fact, I'm gonna let George close this out here because I'm happy to talk to anybody, answer any questions. You don't have to buy a book. Feel free to come up and ask me. If you couldn't ask your question, I'll be right there. I'm going to hand the mic off because I want to think global but invite local. George Martin here, Wisconsin, Milwaukee, National Peace Movement Organizer. The floor is George's. I'm happy to answer questions and sign books.
You know, all family, so much of this touched me. And as people say, what happened to the peace movement? It was the Obama election. And it took the money and the workers from the movement, and the Nobel Peace Prize says we're all good. He's black, there's no more racism. And things continue to go downhill. I'm not up here to dish him, although I'm a former national co-chair of the Green Party of the United States. But I'm not here to talk that politics. What I'm here to say is that as we live in our communities, there are so many things. Every time you turn around, every time you pick up the newspaper, how exasperated do we get? You know, and I want to be a cheerleader. And I want to say that Washington has been stuck on stupid for decades. And the only thing that works in this country is local democracy. I hear about the 2020 election. I'm looking at November. I can't think about 2020. I'm talking about replacing people who don't represent us and to move forward to getting some balance in Washington, D.C. I don't care whatever party you have. Don't blame another party. Half this country doesn't vote. And during the last couple elections, half the people who voted before didn't vote. And we all have a responsibility, if we believe in democracy and nonviolence, to bring out this vote, to raise up the issues, no matter what they are. Whether it's militarism abroad or militarism right here at home. And I don't want to take up a lot of time, but I could talk about fascism. I could talk about being in Greece last year this time, and thousands of peace activists and immigrants were battling with fascists who were paying young men and training them to attack immigrants and people of color and lefties. I go see my friends at a conference and 12 of them have broken arms. That same process that happens with Israel and Palestine. Fascism is not that far away. We have to take control of our communities. The federal government has said we're not responsible for police departments anymore. Every city, village in this country has different policies and practices. 486 black men and Latinos have been killed this year by police. I look in the rearview mirror of my car and I see a squad car, my heart goes like this. There is so much to do. And the only way we can control this stuff is to take over our city halls, go out and vote, support good people, take over our police departments and police commissions and change things. There's a story on the other day, we talk about the NRA and guns. There was a mayor from some town in the Carolinas. And he had outlawed bump stocks. They had outlawed, AR, multiple weapons, repeating weapons. They had outlawed in the community, don't bring your gun into Dodge. It's not going to happen here. We can do that locally. We have to stand up and fight for our rights, but we do it right now. We do it in our individual cities and villages, city resolutions. I'll tell you here, during the Iraq War, we did in Milwaukee, we did it in 42 cities in Wisconsin. We won 39 of it. That influenced our Congress people. We can do things locally, and we need to do that, whether it's around climate, whether it's around peace, police, whatever the issue. Let's stand up and reflect where we come from. Thank you. Peace and love.